The Army way, the Toyota way, very, very similar. Crawl, walk, run, all accompanied by a solid written document. But that document's not a crutch. You're eventually supposed to get to the point where you don't need to be looking at it every step of the way. The success of an SOP is one that is so good that once you've read it a few times while reading it, you can go back to it for reference if you forget something, but primarily it's for new people, like new shipping and receiving clerks. I'd run them through with the SOP open, and then I would have them do it without looking at it. And then once they got comfortable with it, they were cut loose. And then some of them, went on to train other clerks.
Welcome to the Warehouse Insider Podcast. I am your host, Cliff Hardesty, joined by my co-host, Jeremy Hess. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, good. How are you?
Pretty good, man. Hey, I'm excited for this episode. We have Joshua Neuman joining us today. He is an inventory control specialist in the manufacturing space. How are you doing, Josh?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast. I've been following it since you got in touch with me. I like the perspective you guys bring, especially your guests.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, we're glad to have you on today, man. And like I said, we've for the audience, me and Josh have been LinkedIn connected for a while now, so we've been following each other. And we just reached out the other day and asked Josh to be on the show, and he said he'd like to join. So here we are. So we're excited to learn more about what Josh does in the logistics space and how we can bring more value to our audience. So with that, Josh, I'll kind of let you introduce yourself and just kind of let the audience know a little bit about your background.
All right, Cliff, Jeremy, audience. I got into logistics when I was in the Army. My job getting back from Afghanistan, I was in an infantry company over there. But when I got back, I went back to my artillery unit, and I was the executive officer of an artillery headquarters battery. So that's like the equivalent of an infantry company, 100-man unit. So we had all of the specialty units that enable like all the guns to fire. So we had all of their radars and meteorological stations, et cetera. So I had a 40-vehicle fleet that I had to maintain, a $20 million property book. I had to plan multimodal stuff to like get, the vehicles from place to place on exercises and get them on, rail cars, and to go down to Fort Polk, Louisiana. I was out of the Army by that point, but I actually set up put in place. But most importantly, I maintained the unit's property book, and our supply sergeant was my direct report. So ordering stuff, doing cyclic inventories, that was my first taste of this world. Then I spent, when I got out of the Army, I spent about 10 years in agronomy, large-scale row crop production. When I was in Afghanistan, I just was inspired by being in the countryside, surrounded by agriculture, and I had these romantic notions about feeding the world. It was a noble thing, but by the same token, I didn't have the passion for the whole holistic biological system of agriculture that I do for, apparently, when I was also an agronomist, making sure we had enough seed, fertilizer, and shipping out large amounts of harvested crop to various clients receiving or like maintaining our temperature controlled seed bank. So it's always been something about keeping wares, stuff organized and getting it from point A to point B without losing it in the most efficient way possible that excited me. Don't know why, but it did. So a couple years ago, it's been about 3 to 4 years, something like that. I decided to get out of agronomy, and I came back to Connecticut. I was in Georgia and New Mexico for that stuff, and I started from scratch, literally at the bottom, working for several companies, doing everything from inbound receiving to picking, packing, and outbound at a large distribution center, and presently in inventory control in a company that manufactures boxes for box trucks. Is one of the bigger companies in space. So I've done a little bit of everything in the warehousing space, mostly in the DC, well, also retail, big box retail, huge distribution center, and now currently in the manufacturing space, where our warehouse, our customer, is our production line. So, but what really ties everything together, and what I want to talk about today, is I've never worked anywhere where it seems feasible to immediately go hot and heavy with say AMRs. AMRs are all the rage these days. And I'll tell you one place where I worked, a big government warehouse. Their two fetch robots, which is now owned by Zebra, were still sitting in their crate because they had no way to They bought the robots because robots are cool, and robots are cool, but what are they going to do with them? So this will segue into what you guys want to ask me, I suppose.
Right. Cool. Thanks for that. I guess one question before we jump into the kind of agenda for today. You've been on the front lines of the warehouse, 20 some years ago, right? When you started in the Army, is that correct? Did you start as a...
Well, that would be, not 20-something years ago. We don't want to inflate my resume that much. No, that would be, it's 2024 now. No, accurately, that was 13 years ago. Okay. When I got back in 2011.
So I guess question being, do you think is there a noticeable difference in how call them floor operators perform their duties on a day-to-day basis, or is it relatively similar? I know the market and technology has changed pretty rapidly in the last 10, 15 years across the board, both consumer and enterprise. But do you think that has influenced the way that you do your job at a day-to-day task level at all? Is it significantly different than before? Is it very similar in nature?
Absolutely not. I'm glad you asked that question, because no. I first got good at using Excel when I was an executive officer in the artillery battery. My battery commander taught me a lot of the formulas and functions. That's when I first really started using Excel. Mm-hmm. I have never left an Excel-driven world where, even with your ERP or WMS and your ERP, and I'm assuming all of our listeners know the jargon, so I don't need to use define the acronyms.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So pen and paper still rules everywhere, even in places. There's only been one place that I've worked in the past 14 years, because I've done some aspect of inventory, even as an agronomist, where we did most everything in our scanners. Actually, two places. I'll name one of them by name because low enough level. Target. That was absolutely the best scanner environment I've ever been in. And then another one, that large distribution center, also had an excellent scanner paired with an old WMS that was very effective. Mm-hmm. So no, things have not changed. In fact, I've also since then worked in places where I'm just going to take my glasses off. I want people to see that. But I've also worked in places where even after that, where the majority is pen and paper, where the scanners don't even have their barcode reading capability is not utilized. And then again, also in the government arena, in a position where I was the materials manager of the warehouse. I wasn't the warehouse manager, I was the materials manager. They didn't even have the scanners because their Wi-Fi wasn't set up. Mm-hmm. And we entered everything into the system of record after having done it on pen and paper. And that was for every operation, even the pickers. Mm-hmm. So no, it hasn't changed for the majority of industries. I've yet to be somewhere where I've actually seen. So I realize that I have a very, commanding presence. Like I just get really into stuff. So no, I'm glad you asked that question because no, it hasn't changed.
Yeah, it's a good segue into kind of our topics for today, which I meant to touch on a little earlier. But I guess the first thing we want to do is talk about the difference between we call it low automation warehouses and kind of the new age warehouse that a lot of other podcasts and publications talk about. And if you go to any show like Modex or ProMat or any of those big supply chain shows, you're going to see very expensive and very cool looking robots that are automated in a vacuum, right? And I don't think that is the reality of 80% of the world, especially in manufacturing, which is an industry that's slow to adopt cutting edge technology for many reasons, mostly economics, but also, we want to touch on today, what are some of the other reasons that people are unable to or not willing to adopt technology, right? Is it, my processes aren't correct or not, my culture isn't correct? Are there other areas that people tend to overlook that contribute to being able to even think about getting those systems in place? So I guess the first thing we want to talk about is, what is a low automation warehouse? Is it more common than people might think? What does that kind of landscape look like in your experience, over the last so many years?
All right. Well, I think I answered that question in my long Aspergian monologue for being on the spectrum and getting in the monologues. In fact, I think that we make good. We're good at this job because we're so hyper focused. But a low automation warehouse, in my view, isn't one where you necessarily have no WMS, no scanner. It's primarily what you're saying. We don't have the robots. We don't have a grabber arm going in and pulling the packages and the pallets. We don't have automated guided vehicles. That's what I mean. I mean that you don't have a fetch. Like auto store is one thing I'm interested in, and I wrote something about someone wrote something on a post that I shared on LinkedIn the other day about not having the setup, which is one reason why I think there's low adoption because it's hard to retrofit your facility. One of my other contacts said, well, what about AutoStore? And as I remember, it's AutoStore or one of the other ones where they seem very good. And I've listened to 2 episodes of another one of our friends' podcasts where he's had AutoStore in. But I think that one of the videos I saw, it was either them or someone very related. Like they do a good job of piece picking, but by the same token, you have to have some sort of like tray table thing that the robot picks up. And yeah, it's basically that. You can't have good adoption when you don't have the way to retrofit. So it's not that you don't have a WMS. Like if you don't have a WMS, if you don't have a scanner, like I can't even begin to imagine. Like I already told you, I worked in a place where we didn't have that, but that same agency, I worked at another one of their facilities where we did, and the one where we didn't, the inefficiency was so astoundingly not great that it was beyond belief. But I will tell you, it would be better to have to do everything on pen and paper and then enter into your system of record than to have a bad transition from an old green screen to a newer ERP and either Oracle or SAP, whatever you want to call that iteration of the Oracle ones or the SAP ones, where I worked, it was. I'm just going to say it for this particular organization, Naval Supply Systems Command. But I worked in 2 different facilities. One where they were still operating on the green screen pre-transition. The other one where they where they moved over to what I call NERP. And it was not a good transition, and it caused all sorts of problems. The other place was more operationally effective because the old the old green screen just was easier to use, worked better. So do not transition to tech before you have a good plan in place. Use your lower tech, and if God forbid, if you have to just do stuff pen and paper, if you're a small enough business that you could afford that time, keep doing it that way. Your processes.
So, what are some of I think you just hit it on the last point you made. What are some of the things that an organization should focus on before they consider a new technology system? What are some of the things that need to be kind of refined or optimized, or at least given some attention to before they can consider an overhaul? I know a lot of companies have the very corporate road mapping process where they talk about, as is and to be, but like, are there some things on the ground level, maybe like culture of the workers or, just workflow process basics that people might overlook in some of those projects?
Yes. Since you said culture, would you mind if I talk about culture before we get to the other things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because to me, culture is the pinnacle. I'm actually going to stand up. Sometimes I like to stand while I talk. If you don't have a good organizational culture and having the best possible people doing the work is fundamental. It is so essential that without the highest quality team members, and I'm not saying employees, I'm saying team members for a reason. I love the Target, terminology. That's what they called us. Walmart calls you associates. At Target, they called us team members. And then there's a psychological point behind it. You're all in a team to try to achieve maximum efficiency at lowest cost. Everyone is a valuable link in that chain, in that supply chain within the warehouse, pun intended.
So yeah,
you need to have really strong SOPs. I'm sorry. Continue with your question before I apologize.
They were related. I guess I wanted to ask what makes up a good culture, right? And I think you were starting to answer that with your SOP point.
Yeah. But all right, focus, Josh. A good culture is one in which you've already selected the best people you could find. You go recruiting down to your shipping and receiving clerks at, say, the local vocational schools, right out of high school. You look for people who are detail-oriented. You do an in-person interview at the career fair. You bring, one of your more experienced materials handlers, and you bring, alternate between bringing the warehouse manager and the materials manager for the plant. And then after that, when you bring them on the first day on the job, you start showing them things incrementally. They have a good hard copy SOP to follow. They're paired with a trainer from day one, and you hammer down on that. You gradually build them into subject matter experts. SOPs after already having vetted people. I don't believe in temp labor. I think that it's all right when you use variable or some of these modern temp things where there's vetting. It's kind of like the Angie's List of.
So how do you address seasonal demand shift without temp labor? is there a alternative solution to that?
Well, yes, and I'm about to contradict myself. Yes, having variable or I'm forgetting some of the other ones. Our other friend who I'm not gonna necessarily plug by name unless you don't care if I do.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Kevin Lawton has had a couple of these guys on before, and I actually installed variable on my phone back when I was, looking to, but I don't think they've expanded in Connecticut. I think those things are good, but to address that seasonal demand. But what I think is better is trying to pay competitively enough that you can build a solid hardcore of materials handlers at enough capacity that they're going to stay there all the time. And if what you're getting at is when you have slumps where it's hard to maintain your, like paying the bills and also paying their salaries. If is that what you mean?
Kind of. I mean, I know there are a lot of industries that receive much higher demands in some months of the year, or weather conditions and whatnot, and conversely, you have some parts of the year where your demand is much lower. So, how do you address those efficiency fluctuations? Is there, do you just keep them around because they're so positively beneficial to when things are ramping up, or do you how do you scale that from a management perspective while also maintaining a good culture across the board?
Okay, I worked at a place that like that, because the big distribution center that I worked in was in the recreational motorboat industry, and our off season was the winter.
Right.
After we sold all of our bales of shrink wrap and like other winterizing materials, we only ran one truck throughout the year. And in peak season, we ran 24.
Wow.
We maintained our best people throughout the year, but yes, they did use a hiring a temp agency for peak season. But I'll tell you, the difference in quality was marked sometimes. And by the way, they recruited from that temp agency and put people on permanent if they were really good. So,
and was it a well-known, were the temps aware that was a possibility if they were interested or able?
Yes.
I think that's a good distinguishment, because people who come in just knowing that it's only temp work might not be as invested in the culture and the long-term success of the team, right? But if there's the potential for permanence there, I think that's a big difference.
I agree.
Companies that like Express that do like the temp work and stuff find employees for warehousing companies. It's very, very expensive, they say. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just talking to customers and stuff, because we have a customer down the street there in retail, and their peak season's around Labor Day, and they'll have like 1,400 associates in the warehouse.
Wow.
Around peak season. And so he was just telling me, these companies, like I said, like Express or whoever that are like employment companies, they do all the.
It's called the Deco. That's our big company up here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they charge an arm and a leg to get these temp workers and stuff. So it's a huge cost for them. So if they can maintain, quality talent and stuff, it helps, where there's not as much turnover.
I think so culture's obviously a big point. I think something that I've seen a lot in the clients that I've worked with and the places that I've been as a vendor, SOPs, even at the largest companies, are not well maintained and not well written. And I think that is a big part of people feeling, what's the word? Attended to, or not set up to succeed if there's no training or documentation on how to perform their job efficiently and how to kind of progress your way through things and become more senior, right? If there's no clear path to, one, doing your job, and two, climbing kind of the ladder, I think it can be very demotivating, and it makes the job feel very short-sighted. Do you have a framework for how you like to approach, say you were going to a warehouse that had no documentation, SOPs are very minimal or they're outdated. What would how would you start reshaping that? And how would you start building up their, SOP documentation base, as well as training people on those new kind of procedures, or even existing ones that are just being written down?
Well, I have done this. At that same big distribution center, they already had some skeletal SOPs, and some of them were pretty decent, but I fleshed them out. What I would do hypothetically, so just bring in hypothetical, is I would ask my my lead if I could join the training team and write some materials to supplement what we currently have, and in some cases eventually replace them. And the way that I write SOPs goes back to the way I was trained in the Army. Everything is written to a 6th grade reading level, and it's written in kind of outline numbered format, covering every single step. And there's and in the Army not so much, but with me, I always put illustrations. Like I will use actual, like say I wrote an SOP for shipping and receiving. I took a picture of what, one of our typical POs looks like, what, the shipping labels look like. I took screenshots going through the scanner process, and then I would guide people on like new shipping and receiving clerks. I'd run them through one or two POs with the SOP open, and then I would have them do it without looking at it. And then once they got comfortable with it, they were cut loose. And then some of them, went on to train other clerks. So that's the Toyota way of doing things too. I mean, like the Army way, the Toyota way, very, very similar. Crawl, walk, run, all accompanied by a solid written document. But that document's not a crutch. You're eventually supposed to get to the point where you don't need to be looking at it every step of the way. The success of an SOP is one that is so good that once you've read it a few times while reading it, you could go back to it for reference if you forget something, but primarily it's for new people, and it's easily modified. That's one reason why it's in outline format. So yeah.
Do you think on a similar note, do you think lack of documentation and lack of training, especially with SaaS software becoming more popular, the kind of initial investment in implementation and training configuration is sometimes kind of overlooked? I think a lot of companies and consumers especially, but even companies want to just purchase something on a monthly basis. They want to throw it on their devices and say, here's, kind of figure it out on your own. Do you think that is detrimental to, process? Like say that an existing operation has, a set of SOPs, they're well documented, and they incorporate a new technology for, let's say document management or, whatever it be, shipping. And it kind of throws off that it's contradictory to the existing SOPs because a lot of SaaS software is kind of pre-built to have a certain workflow. How do you address that discrepancy? Is it just something that you need to, talk to the vendor beforehand about? Is there more planning involved, or is it we need to train our trainers beforehand kind of thing? What's your approach to incorporating a new lightweight piece of software into your current ecosystem?
I'm going to say all of the above to what you to all your questions. I wholeheartedly agree because I've been through multiple transitions by now, and I've never seen one work, not one. and that's, I'm going to back up on. It's not so much because the software inherently interferes with the previous workflow, because the workflow should always be the same. You get something coming in, you receive it, transfer it physically, enter it into the system of record. Right. I mean, that should never change. What does change are the keystrokes and such. And
the mechanics of how you do it.
What?
The mechanics of how it's done.
Yes, the mechanics of how it's done in the system. And one thing that can really change for the worse is when you're in an environment where you have an ERP that's not synced with a WMS, because they're fundamentally two slightly different nuances, and not having that linkage can be ruinous. When in the case of, say, your old green screen, it basically melded those two functions much better. But to get to your main point, the biggest problem is a lot of these new things, because I've been through both Oracle conversions and SAP conversions, there was no documentation of any substance. You go through, I mean, I'm sure you guys have used these systems before. You have some training, which is basically just going through some decontextualized vignette that has no applicability. Oh yeah, I could have figured out how to punch those buttons myself. Big deal. And then like that's what's considered your training. Then what are you going to consult? Because that's the biggest problem with this stuff. Because like, say, I'm going to go back to Target, for example. One thing that's great about Target and I'm assuming Walmart's Zebras is those scanners are an Android phone essentially. You can plug and play. My very first day inbound at Target, I was able to literally go in that scanner without anyone showing me and look at our manifest for the truck we were receiving that night. No one showed me. I figured it out myself. But like all these other ones, like when you move to a new ERP or something, no, that's why you need written SOPs that the organization has either has written itself, because no one tells you how to do anything. And yes, a portion of it does have to do with setting this up better with the vendor, like to see what the company really needs in terms of functionality. But the biggest problem is the fact that there's nothing written that you can reference. I
think referenceable material is very important. I mean, we've seen a lot of training, like to your point, where it's just you watch a video for 30 minutes, it walks you through something, and then you have to go figure it out on your own without being able to go back to any illustrations or, you know, here's how-to steps. Do you think, on a kind of a different note, do you think WMS software would you say that it's kind of required for an efficient inventory operation? Are there operations that you've seen yourself that have been, optimized without the use of that kind of software? Are there, is it something that you kind of just need to have if you want to be, pushing good efficiency?
Absolutely. I have seen operations go backwards because they made conversions from an old green screen legacy system to AS400, as people say. AS400 is the computer, not the bitches. But people going from, like, organizations going from the old system to something new because they want to, quote, get with the times. Well, no, if you haven't actually thoroughly crafted that conversion, because as you mentioned, or well, you kind of alluded to, there are so many different levels you can get out of, say, SAP and Oracle, ERP systems customized to your organizational needs. And if you get the bare minimum versions, you're not going to be able to have the level of inventory visibility you once had, because you're basically just getting a piece of accounting software that you're using as an inventory tracking tool. And it doesn't work, primarily because ERPs don't default think in terms of an issue unit of measure. They think in terms of, the gross, like whatever your gross product is, or say like in a manufacturing environment, like whatever you need for, say, like a bill of materials. Like, say, if I have a 10-foot bar of, or steel channel or whatever, it's thinking in terms of, oh, this manufacturing process requires 1.525, feet of this. Well, do you know what? I don't issue it that way.
Right.
So when it then comes to issuance,
comes a black box.
There are invariably, and this happens in the distribution center environment when you just have an ERP too, not just in manufacturing, where it's like they're issuing out erroneously, and pickers will do it, a single screw, because they're like the screws come in a bag of 10, and then you're like left with 9 screws, and then you're counting the other packs. So then in the inventory, when the cycle counters go, they say we have like 9.75, of a unit. What does that mean? That's because of thinking in ERP, and they lost the WMS function that their old green screen had. You can look when you peg down in these ERPs to make the unit of measure conversion, but half the time these people don't know that, so they didn't already convert the unit of measure before they printed out the cycle count sheet. So then you get these convoluted numbers that you have to do, your dimensional analysis to like adjust it. So yeah, you absolutely need a WMS. If you don't have a WMS, unless you're a very small company and really can just do stuff on pen and paper, then and then plug it in Excel, great. But you need a WMS. You absolutely do.
One thing I kind of wanted to touch on, as we kind of finish up here, is the terminology clarification between warehouse management and inventory management. And I think sometimes people use the terms interchangeably, and I think they're a little different in nature. What are, I guess, could you define the two for us in your own words, and what are the kind of the key differences? Are there points in the company life cycle where you need one versus the other? I know a lot of warehouse management includes inventory management as kind of a precursor, but where's the kind of delineation between you need one or the other, or both?
You need both. Because the warehouse manager is responsible for the operational management of all the processes within the warehouse. Mm-hmm. Then your inventory control manager or your materials manager, whatever you're calling it, I'd say materials manager is probably better for within the manufacturing space, mm-hmm. where you have both these things. So your inventory control manager, that person manages their team of inventory control specialists. So they liaise with the warehouse manager. The warehouse manager is ultimately responsible for all of that inventory in the warehouse, but it's the inventory control manager and their inventory control team who's making sure that inventory is accurate and bring it to the attention of the warehouse manager when it's not. So that way the warehouse manager and they could all do the root cause analysis to figure out where the problems are and how to address them. And it's ultimately that warehouse manager that addresses this with mm-hmm. With the ship, the team members doing the shipping and receiving inbound, outbound.
Right. So from a software perspective, are they both, if you're trying to implement some new technology, is there a starting point? Would you start with the inventory control first and then kind of expand it out to the warehouse side? Would you do both of them at the same time? Would you start with the warehouse management first and kind of leave inventory as is? Does it depend? What's the migration path look like for someone who doesn't want to do all of everything at once, maybe?
Wait, what do you mean by that? As far as ease of use, or
from like a product family, I think that in my experience, there are products that specifically call themselves inventory management systems or software, and there are products that specifically categorize themselves as warehouse management software. Is there a difference? Is there what is the difference, and what is the advised path going from a low automation warehouse to something more high tech?
I only know about what you're telling me in an abstract sense, because I know there are warehouse management systems and this warehouse execution system term that I've heard over the mm-hmm. past year. But to me, a warehouse management system is what you're calling an inventory management system.
Mhm.
It's tracking where the induction of material on inbound, and then it's put away, it's picking, it's shipping, like it's printing the packing slips, et cetera, et cetera. So I honestly don't know
fair.
what. No, I'm actually interested. Like what I'm not aware of this. So
Yeah, we can get into it. I mean, inventory management. There's some software that categorizes itself as inventory management specifically because it doesn't want to deal with a lot of the either external integration or external interfacing that warehouse management software does. So it's a subset of warehouse management, systems as you know them probably. So it's more about receiving inventory movement control within the warehouse, and then usually shipping is not a huge part of it. As far as functionality goes, you're leaving out in an inventory management system. You're leaving out things like advanced picking rules, the ability to have directed put away. A lot of analytics are not typically included from a human capital management perspective. Like you're not getting labor analytics. You're not getting as much of the high level decision making power that you would have with a WMS. You're getting more of the control aspect of I can transact SKUs from location to location. I can move things around, but I don't have that higher level functionality.
This is the reason why I didn't understand that, because like I told you, I'm coming from legacy systems.
Right.
Legacy systems, even though they're WMSs, generally are what you're calling an inventory management system.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
They at the levels that I never saw, because I wasn't privy to them. Not I both didn't have access to those functions, and I had no interest in looking at those functions.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, our system had that. I mean, had certain aspects of that on its business side.
And when you say that, you're referring to a WMS in this context as I'm defining it?
Yes,
okay.
I'm referring to it in the sense of like the old legacy ones that
Gotcha.
80% of it was what you're calling an inventory management system. I'm referring to a specific one that I worked with.
Okay.
At that big distribution center. They had another side to it that had there was no directed put away, but all of that customer relationship management and like printing all of the shipping documents and et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. There was a slice of that partitioned off.
I see.
But okay, so if this is the way you have to phrase it, inventory management system, absolutely. That's absolutely the most important thing. You don't need to direct the putaways, because honestly, if your people were worth their salt, and your warehouse manager and your shipping manager worth their salt, they should already know the best places to put stuff. And yeah, we never got into all of the tactics, techniques, and procedures of how to format your warehouse and space utilization.
Right.
That's part about it goes back to company culture, creating a team with upward progression where you're already getting smart people showing them how warehousing is a profession that starts from shipping and receiving clerk, goes up to shift lead, shift supervisor, warehouse manager, materials manager, demand planning. There's a progression. They can get they could get ASCM, APIC certification, get the CLTD, the CPIM. I'm studying for my CLTD right now. This is a career. Every small little thing, from knowing how to palletize something to figuring out how to make the best use of your space on your racks, all of these little things add up to big things. Nothing's too small. So when people talk about freeing people up to do the value-added work, do you know what's also value-added? Knowing how to stack a pallet so that all of your boxes are interlocking and don't tumble down. Mm-hmm. Everything is in this field is value-added. So yeah, the inventory management part, you don't need the bells and whistles. Mm-hmm. That's what the human brain's for.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of been like the overarching theme of this episode. It's been kind of like laying the foundation, right? It's like having a solid foundation before you implement,
Yeah, right.
These
100%.
certain technologies, right? It's like making sure your business processes are efficient to put a WMS in place or an inventory control software in place. So with that, as we kind of wrap it up, I'm kind of curious, Josh, like where do you see yourself in 10 years? Do you plan on still being in the automotive manufacturing space and the logistics supply chain? I mean, what does the future look like for Josh?
Ultimately, I would, I really like my company, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
It's just because I don't officially represent them that I'm not naming them. Anyone
Mm-hmm.
can go on LinkedIn and find out who it is. I'd like to, move up within my company in my current location and ultimately like either be warehouse manager or materials manager. I think that ultimately I'm more set for something like materials management because I have that kind of analytical mindset, but I like doing both.
Mm-hmm.
I like doing these things that I put in my outline that people say, people don't like to unload the truck. People don't like to do heavy work. I do. I honestly do. I love being on the floor. But I also like thinking about, the higher level strategy of how to, right size your inventory so you're not glutted with stuff or, have stock out, just right size. So yeah, I want to stay pretty much where I am. I'm definitely going to stay in the supply chain space. Like I said, I'm getting my CLTD because I like the holistic big picture.
Yeah.
And the CLTD has a little bit of everything. So, yeah.
So I guess my last question would be, what advice would you give a young warehouse professional in this industry that wants to work their way up to, say, a general manager one day? What's like a one piece of advice that you would give them?
Get certification in this field. Ideally, if you want to be like the GM, go get your supply chain management degree. And I'm going to plug 2 schools in my local area. Three Rivers Community College has a 2-year associate's, and then Central Connecticut State University has a 4-year degree. And then follow that up with the CPIM after that. But while you're in school, get internships, which my company has them, by the way.
Nice.
We had 2 very gifted interns this year. Like, if you want to be the general manager, learn what the grunts do, what the team members do. Know your stuff, not just from the book. Do it.
Yep.
Yeah, get a combination of both.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know in some of the warehouses I've gone into, there's been people with backgrounds from like Georgia Southern and Auburn. I know both of those schools have good supply chain management backgrounds. So I've met several people from those schools. They seem to have a very good program that are local to this area. Anyways,
I think Georgia State does too, right?
Do they?
As long as we're plugging Georgia.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Georgia State. I know I've had several people that I've talked to from Georgia Southern.
That's
Auburn.
a good school. I know them both.
Yep. So, awesome. Jeremy, do you have any more questions?
I'm good. Thank you, Josh. It was very informative.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Josh. We really appreciate it, and I think it brought a lot of value to our audience. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Cliff.
And if anybody would like to learn more, too, about you, Josh, where can they find you?
Oh, well, I mean, you could find me on LinkedIn. I mean, I go by my full name, Joshua Neuman.
Okay.
My picture is probably the only one of a supply chain professional wearing an Oregon wheat hat, sitting in a field of wheat with by a wheel line irrigation system out in Central Oregon. So Joshua Neuman, Neuman. That was back from my agronomy days, but I still kept the picture. Nice. So yeah, that's awesome. Where they can find me.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, sounds good. Thank you, Josh.
All right.
Take care, y'all.
All right. See you guys.